Camden Price fired 23 people on a Tuesday morning and didn't flinch once. She signed the papers, shook no hands, offered no apologies. By noon, security had escorted the last one out. By evening, a snowstorm buried the city and buried her car in a ditch on the side of the highway. She called the only number she had left. Her lowest-paid employee answered. 48 hours later, Camden Price woke up in a stranger's bed, wearing a man's flannel shirt with a 5-year-old girl curled against her chest. And for the first time in 20 years, she didn't want to leave. But this story doesn't begin where you think it does. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. The conference room smelled like fresh coffee and fear. Camden Price stood at the head of the long mahogany table, her hands flat against the polished surface. 14 department heads sat in front of her, and not one of them could hold her gaze. "Let me be clear," Camden said. Her voice didn't rise. It never rose. That was what made it dangerous. "I didn't call this meeting to hear excuses. I called it to hear solutions. And so far, I've heard neither." Gerald Hoffman, the CFO, cleared his throat. He was 62 years old, had been with the company since its founding, and Camden had watched him age 10 years in the last 6 months. "Camden, the numbers aren't. The numbers are exactly what I said they'd be 18 months ago." She tapped the projection screen behind her without turning around. "Revenue down 14%. Operating costs up 9%. And this quarter's projections." She paused. "Should I read them out loud, Gerald, or would you prefer to do it yourself?" Gerald said nothing. "That's what I thought." She turned to the rest of the room. "Effective immediately, we're restructuring 3 departments: marketing, client services, and operations. I've already drafted the plans. HR will begin processing terminations by end of week." A murmur ran through the table. Camden let it die on its own. "How many?" asked Diana Marsh, the head of HR. Her pen was already poised over her notepad. 23, Camden said. "For now." "For now," Gerald repeated. "Did I stutter?" The room went quiet. Camden gathered her tablet, straightened her jacket, and walked toward the door. She stopped with her hand on the handle. "One more thing. I don't want anyone leaking this to the press before the official announcement. If I find out someone in this room talked, they'll be number 24. She left the door open behind her. She always did. It was a power move she'd learned from her father: never close the door because closing it implies the conversation mattered enough to contain. Her assistant Priya was waiting in the hallway with her phone and a stack of messages. "Your 3 o'clock canceled?" Priya said, matching Camden's stride. "The Whitfield Group wants to reschedule for Thursday, and Julian Reed from Facilities called again about the heating issue on the 4th floor." Camden didn't slow down. "Tell Whitfield Friday or never, and tell Reed to submit a work order like everyone else." He did, twice. He says the thermostat panel needs to be replaced, not just reset, and he's been waiting on approval for 3 weeks. Camden stopped walking. She turned to look at Priya. "Who is Julian Reed?" "Facilities maintenance. He's been with us about 2 years. And he's calling my assistant directly." Priya hesitated. "He called the general line. It got routed to me because the facilities manager is on leave." Camden exhaled through her nose. "Fine. Approve the panel. And Priya, make sure he knows this isn't a direct line to my office." "Yes, ma'am." Camden continued walking. She didn't think about Julian Reed again for the rest of the afternoon. She had 23 termination letters to finalize. The layoffs began the next morning at 8 sharp. Camden handled them personally. She always did. Other CEOs delegated this to HR, sent form letters hid behind policies and procedures. Camden believed if you were going to cut someone loose, you should look them in the eye while you did it. She sat behind her desk. They came in one at a time. Some cried, some argued. One man, Thomas from operations, 54 years old, 2 kids in college, just stared at her like she'd reached across the desk and slapped him. I gave this company 11 years, he said. And the company appreciates your service, Camden replied. Her voice was steady, professional, practiced. Your severance package reflects that. Severance. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You know what severance buys Ms. Price? About 3 months, then what? I understand this is difficult. Do you? Thomas leaned forward. Do you really understand? Because from where I'm sitting, you look like someone who's never had to worry about where next month's rent is coming from. Camden held his gaze. She didn't blink. She didn't respond. Thomas stood up, shook his head, and walked out. Camden sat there for exactly 4 seconds. Then she pressed the intercom. Send in the next one. By noon, all 23 were done. Yeah. She ate lunch alone in her office, a salad she didn't taste, a sparkling water she barely touched. She scrolled through her phone. No messages that weren't work-related. No missed calls from friends because Camden Price didn't have friends. She had colleagues, competitors, and subordinates. That was the architecture of her life, and she'd built it that way on purpose. Her phone buzzed. A weather alert. Says winter storm warning. Heavy snowfall expected tonight through Wednesday morning. Accumulations of 12 to 18 inches. Travel not advised after 6 p.m. Camden glanced out the window. The sky was already turning the color of ash. She called her driver. Marcus, I need to leave by 5 tonight. The storm. A pause. Ms. Price, I'm sorry I'm already upstate. My mother had a fall this morning. I won't be back until Thursday. Camden closed her eyes. Fine, I'll drive myself. She hung up and immediately regretted it. She hadn't driven herself in 3 years. Her car, a silver Audi sedan, was sitting in the parking garage, and she wasn't even sure the last time it had been started. But Camden Price did not ask for help. That was rule number 1. Rule number 2 was never let anyone see you hesitate. She packed her bag, shut down her computer, and headed for the garage at 5:15 p.m. The snow was already falling. The Audi made it exactly 11 miles. Camden was on Route 9 heading toward her penthouse in the city when the engine coughed. She'd noticed the temperature gauge climbing, but ignored it. She had ignored it the way she ignored most problems that weren't directly related to quarterly earnings. Then the dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree, and the car shuddered and died in the right lane. She pulled to the shoulder, tried to restart. Nothing. Just a clicking sound that felt like mockery. Come on, she muttered. She turned the key again. Click, click, click. She sat back and looked at the windshield. Snow was coming down hard now, thick and fast, and the wind was pushing it sideways. Her heels were wrong. Her coat was wrong. Everything about this situation was wrong. She picked up her phone. 1 bar of signal. She called roadside assistance. 45 minutes minimum. Probably longer because of the storm. She called 3 car services. All booked. She scrolled through her contacts, all business contacts, board members, investors, executives, and realized with a slow, sickening clarity that there was not a single person in her phone she could call for a personal favor. Not one. Her fingers were getting cold. The heat had died with the engine. She could see her breath now, small white clouds that vanished as fast as they appeared. She scrolled further, past the A's, the B's, all the way down to R. Reed Julian Facilities. She stared at the name. She remembered Priya mentioning him, the heating panel, the man who'd called twice. She pressed the number before she could talk herself out of it. It rang 3 times. Hello? A man's voice. Calm, unhurried. There was background noise, a child's laughter, something sizzling on a stove. This is Camden Price. A pause. Ms. Price. From the office. Yes, I need help. She heard the child laugh again, then Julian's voice slightly muffled. Rosie, stir that for me, okay? Don't let it stick. Then he was back. What's wrong? My car broke down. Route 9 about a mile past the Greenfield exit. I can't get a tow or a car service. In this storm? Yes. Another pause. She expected him to hesitate, to make an excuse, to tell her to call someone else, someone whose career she hadn't nearly ended with a memo about staffing cuts. Instead, he said, I'm about 15 minutes away. Stay in the car. Keep your hazards on. Camden started, but she didn't know what she was going to say. Thank you, I'm sorry. Why are you helping me? 15 minutes, Julian repeated. I'm coming. He hung up. Camden sat in the dark car watching the snow pile on the windshield and tried to remember the last time someone had said, I'm coming to her without expecting something in return. She couldn't. Julian's truck pulled up behind her Audi exactly 14 minutes later. She saw the headlights, first two pale beams cutting through the wall of white. Then the truck itself, an old Ford F-15. Oh, that looked like it had survived more winters than Camden had been alive. It rumbled to a stop, and a man got out. He was tall. Not in a way that announced itself, but in a way you noticed when he was standing next to you. He wore a heavy work jacket, jeans, and boots that looked like they'd actually been used for work. No scarf, no gloves. He knocked on her window. Camden opened the door. The cold hit her like a wall. Ms. Price. He extended his hand, not to shake to help her out of the car. I'm Julian. We should move. The plows are going to come through here in about 20 minutes, and they won't slow down. She took his hand. His grip was firm and warm. My bag, she said. I'll get it. He reached past her into the car, grabbed her leather briefcase and her overnight bag, and carried them to the truck. He opened the passenger door for her and waited while she climbed in. The truck's heater was blasting. The seat was warm. On the dashboard there was a crayon drawing taped next to the speedometer, a stick figure with yellow hair holding hands with a bigger stick figure. Underneath, in a child's handwriting, me and Daddy. Julian got back in the driver's side and pulled onto the road. He drove slowly, carefully, both hands on the wheel. For a full minute, neither of them spoke. Thank you, Camden said finally. The words felt foreign in her mouth. You're welcome. I'll compensate you for your time, and the gas. Julian glanced at her. Just a quick look, then back to the road. You don't need to do that. I insist. Ms. Price, I drove 15 minutes in the snow. I didn't perform surgery. He said it without sarcasm, without edge, just a plain fact. Camden didn't know what to do with that. In her world, everything was transactional. Every favor had a price tag. Every act of kindness was an investment that expected returns. Where am I taking you? Julian asked. My apartment. It's in the city on. We're not getting to the city tonight. He nodded toward the windshield. The snow was coming down so thick now that the headlights barely penetrated 10 feet. They're closing the highways. I heard it on the radio right before you called. Camden felt something she rarely felt, a loss of control. Then where? My place is about 5 minutes from here. You can stay until the storm passes. My daughter and I have plenty of room. He paused. Well, we have a couch and a spare blanket, but it's warm. Camden opened her mouth to refuse. Every instinct she had, every defense mechanism she'd built over 2 decades of climbing, fighting, and surviving in a world that punished softness, told her to say no. But the wind howled against the truck, and the snow was blinding, and she was cold and tired, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she had no better option. Okay, she said quietly. Julian nodded. Okay. They drove the last 5 minutes in silence, and Camden watched the world outside disappear into white. The house was small. That was Camden's first thought. Not judgmental, just observational. In her world, square footage was a measure of success. Her penthouse was 4,000 square feet of Italian marble and floor-to-ceiling windows. Julian's house was maybe 1,200 square feet of faded siding and a porch with a railing that needed paint. But when he opened the front door, something hit her that she wasn't prepared for. Warmth. Not just heat warmth. The kind that has nothing to do with thermostats and everything to do with the life being lived inside. Daddy. A small body launched itself from the hallway and collided with Julian's legs. Rosie. She was 5 years old, with a tangle of brown curls and eyes that were too smart for her age. She wore pajamas with dinosaurs on them and mismatched socks. Julian scooped her up with one arm. "Hey, Bug, I told you to stay with Mrs. Patterson. She fell asleep." Rosie said this like it was a perfectly reasonable excuse. Julian turned to Camden. "Rosie, this is Ms. Price. She's going to stay with us tonight because of the snow." Rosie looked at Camden with the unfiltered curiosity that only children possess. She took in the heels, the tailored coat, the perfectly styled hair that was now damp and falling apart. "You look cold," Rosie said. "I am cold," Camden admitted. "Daddy makes the best hot chocolate. It fixes everything." Camden almost smiled. Almost. "I doubt hot chocolate fixes everything." Rosie looked at her with absolute seriousness. "It does. You just have to believe it." Julian set Rosie down. "Go wash your hands for dinner. I made soup." "What kind?" "The kind you're going to eat without complaining." Rosie giggled and ran down the hallway. Julian turned to Camden. She was still standing in the doorway, her designer heels on his worn welcome mat, looking like a woman who had accidentally walked onto the wrong movie set. "You should change," he said. "Those clothes aren't going to keep you warm if the power goes out." He walked to a closet, pulled out a flannel shirt, a pair of sweatpants, and thick socks. He held them out to her. Camden stared at the clothes like he was offering her a foreign language. "They're clean," Julian said, and this time there was the faintest trace of humor in his voice. "I didn't think... Bathrooms down the hall on the left." She took the clothes. Their fingers brushed. She pulled back a little too quickly. In the bathroom, Camden caught her reflection in the mirror. Her mascara had smudged. Her hair was a mess. She looked nothing like the woman who had fired 23 people that morning. She looked human, and she put on Julian's flannel shirt. It was soft, worn, soft, the kind of softness that comes from years of washing and wearing, not from a price tag. It smelled like laundry detergent and something else, something warm and specific that she couldn't name. She rolled up the sleeves. The shirt hung past her thighs. She looked ridiculous. She looked comfortable. When she came out, Rosie was sitting at a small kitchen table swinging her legs. Julian was ladling soup into 3 mismatched bowls. He looked up when Camden walked in, and for a moment, just a moment, something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe. Or something softer. "Sit anywhere," he said. Camden sat down across from Rosie. The table was wooden, scarred with use, and there was a ring stain where someone had set down a coffee mug 1,000 times. "Do you like soup?" Rosie asked. "I don't know," Camden said honestly. She hadn't eaten homemade soup since she was a child. Julian set a bowl in front of her. Tomato soup, thick and steaming. Next to it, a piece of bread that he'd clearly toasted in the oven because the edges were uneven and golden. "You don't know if you like soup?" Rosie asked, incredulous. "I usually eat salads," Camden said. "Why?" It was such a simple question, and Camden realized she didn't have a good answer. "I don't know," she said again. "Try the soup," Julian said. He sat down at the head of the table and bowed his head for a moment. Rosie did the same, her little hands folded. Camden watched them, unsure of what to do, and waited. When they looked up, Julian caught her eye. He didn't explain. He didn't apologize for the prayer. He just picked up his spoon. Camden took a bite. It was the best thing she'd tasted in years. "This is good," she said, and the surprise in her own voice made her feel exposed. "Daddy's a good cook," Rosie said matter-of-factly. "He makes everything from scratch because he says the store stuff has too many chemicals." "I said preservatives," Julian corrected. "Same thing." Julian looked at Camden. "She's 5. She already argues like a lawyer." "She argues like a CEO," Camden said, and then stopped because the words had come out warm, almost tender, and she didn't know where that had come from. Rosie beamed. They ate dinner. Rosie talked about school, about her best friend Mia, about the caterpillar she'd found in the backyard that she was convinced was going to become a butterfly, even though Julian had gently explained it was November. Camden listened. She hadn't listened to someone talk without calculating her response in years. She wasn't thinking about agendas, about leverage, about what this conversation could yield. She was just sitting at a table, eating soup, listening to a 5-year-old talk about caterpillars. And something inside her chest, something she'd locked away so long ago she'd forgotten it existed, began to crack. After dinner, Julian washed the dishes by hand. Camden stood in the kitchen doorway and watched him, and she realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd watched someone do something so ordinary. "You don't have a dishwasher," she said. "Nope." "Why not?" Julian rinsed a bowl and set it in the drying rack. "Because I like the quiet." "The quiet." Rosie goes to bed. I do the dishes. I think about the day. It's my time. He shrugged. "A dishwasher would ruin it." Camden leaned against the doorframe. "Most people would consider that inefficient. Most people are wrong about a lot of things." She watched the water run over his hands. Strong hands, working hands. Hands that fixed heating panels and made tomato soup and held a little girl who had no mother. "Julian." "Yeah." "The layoffs today. At the company." He turned off the water. He didn't turn around. "I know about them," he said quietly. "Thomas Rivera, from operations. He was on the list." Julian dried his hands slowly. "Tom's a good man. He coached my daughter's soccer team last spring." Camden felt something sharp twist in her stomach. It wasn't guilt, she didn't allow herself guilt, but it was something close. "I didn't know that," she said. "You wouldn't." He turned around. His face was calm, but his eyes were steady and direct. "Ms. Price, I'm not going to pretend I understand the decisions you have to make. I fix boilers and replace ceiling tiles. That's my world. But I know Tom's got 2 kids and his wife just started chemo in September." The sharp thing in Camden's stomach twisted harder. "I didn't know that either," she said. Julian looked at her for a long moment. Maybe that's the problem. The words hung between them. They weren't angry. They weren't accusatory. They were just true. Camden said nothing. She turned and walked to the living room. She sat on the couch and stared at the wall, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt the full weight of what she carried. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, a 5-year-old was sleeping, and a man who fixed things for a living had just broken something inside Camden Price that she didn't know how to repair. Camden didn't sleep. She lay on Julian's couch with a quilt pulled up to her chin, staring at the ceiling, listening to the storm tear at the walls. The wind sounded personal, like it had come specifically for her, like it knew she was hiding in a house she didn't belong in, wearing a shirt that wasn't hers, pretending she was someone she wasn't. At 2:17 a.m. the power went out. It didn't flicker. It didn't warn her. 1 second the refrigerator was humming, and the hallway nightlight was glowing, and the next second everything was black and silent, and Camden was alone in the dark in a stranger's house, and she couldn't even see her own hands. Oh, she sat up. Her heart was beating too fast. She hated this. The helplessness, the inability to control anything, the feeling of being at the mercy of something bigger than herself. She reached for her phone. 3% battery. No signal. She heard footsteps in the hallway. quiet, purposeful. Then a beam of light swept across the living room, and Julian appeared holding a flashlight. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine. You're sitting straight up in the dark. That's usually not fine." "I said I'm fine, Julian." He didn't argue. He walked past her to the kitchen, and she heard him opening a cabinet, pulling something out. A minute later, he came back with 2 candles and a box of matches. He set them on the coffee table and lit them, and the room filled with a warm, unsteady glow. "Power might be out for a while," he said. "I'm going to check the pipes. If they freeze, we've got a bigger problem. What can I do?" The words came out before Camden could stop them. She didn't know why she'd said it. Camden Price didn't ask what she could do. Camden Price told people what to do. Julian looked at her. In the candlelight, his face was all angles and shadows, and his eyes were dark and steady. "Rosie's going to wake up," he said. "She's scared of the dark. If she comes out here, just talk to her. Keep her calm." "I'm not exactly good with children. You don't have to be good with her. You just have to be here." He disappeared down the hallway, and Camden sat on the couch and waited, and the candles flickered, and the wind howled, and she thought about what he'd said. You just have to be here. Such a simple thing. Such an impossible thing for a woman who had spent her entire adult life being everywhere except present. 5 minutes later, she heard it. Small footsteps. A sniffle. Then Rosie appeared at the edge of the hallway, clutching a stuffed rabbit that was missing one ear. "Where's Daddy?" Rosie's voice was thin and trembling. "He's checking the pipes." Camden paused. "He'll be right back." Rosie didn't move. She stood there in her dinosaur pajamas, her curls flattened on one side from sleep, her eyes wide and glassy with tears. She was trying not to cry. "I don't like the dark," Rosie whispered. Camden looked at this child, this small, fragile, honest creature, and felt something shift in her chest. Not the cracking she'd felt at dinner. Something deeper. Something that hurt. "Come here," Camden said. Rosie hesitated. Then she padded across the room and climbed onto the couch next to Camden. She was warm and small, and she smelled like soap, and she pressed herself against Camden's side like it was the most natural thing in the world. "My mommy used to sing when the lights went out," Rosie said. Camden's throat tightened. "I'm not much of a singer." "That's okay. Daddy's not either. He tries, but he's really bad." Camden almost laughed. "What did your mom sing?" "You Are My Sunshine. Do you know that one?" "Everybody knows that one." "Daddy says Mommy had the best voice. He says when she sang, even the birds stopped to listen." Rosie pulled her rabbit closer. "I don't remember her voice. I was too little." Camden sat perfectly still. She felt like if she moved, something would break the moment the child's trust, the fragile thread, connecting them in this dark room. "How old were you?" Camden asked quietly. "Daddy says I was 2. She got sick and the doctors couldn't fix her." Rosie looked up at Camden. "Daddy says she's watching me from heaven, but I think that's just something daddies say so you don't cry." Camden's eyes burned. She blinked hard. She would not cry in front of a 5-year-old. She would not. "I think," Camden said carefully, "that your daddy believes it. And sometimes believing something is enough." Rosie considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice. Then she nodded. "Will you stay until Daddy comes back?" "Yes." "Promise." "I promise." Rosie leaned her head against Camden's arm. Within minutes her breathing slowed. Her grip on the stuffed rabbit loosened. She was asleep. Camden sat there motionless. This child pressed against her, and she felt the walls she'd spent 20 years building begin to buckle. Not from the storm, not from the cold, from the weight of a sleeping girl who trusted a stranger enough to close her eyes. Julian came back 10 minutes later. He stopped at the edge of the living room and stood there looking at them. Camden on his couch, Rosie curled against her side, the candlelight painting them both in gold. "Pipes are fine," he said softly. "I wrapped them." She was scared. "I know. She always is when the power goes out." He moved closer and gently lifted Rosie from the couch. The girl stirred but didn't wake. Julian held her against his chest with practiced ease, her head on his shoulder, her arms dangling. "I'll put her back to bed," he said. "You should try to sleep." "Julian," he stopped. "She told me about her mother." Julian's face didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted, a door closing, a lock turning. "She talks about her sometimes," he said, "especially during storms. Sarah always loved storms." "Sarah," Camden repeated. The name made the woman reel. "Yeah." Julian adjusted Rosie's weight. "She's been gone 3 years. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like 100 years." He walked down the hallway, and Camden heard a door open, a soft murmur, a door close. Then Julian came back. He sat down in the armchair across from the couch. He didn't turn on another light. He didn't pick up his phone. He just sat. "You don't have to stay up with me," Camden said. "I'm not staying up with you. I'm staying up because if the pipes burst, I need to hear it." "That's very practical." "I'm a practical person." They sat in silence. The candles burned. The storm pressed against the windows like something alive trying to get in. "Can I ask you something?" Julian said. "You can ask." 23 people, in one day." He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the candle flame. "How do you do that?" "Nah." Camden felt her spine straighten, her defenses rising like walls. "It's business, Julian. The company was hemorrhaging money. If I didn't cut, everyone loses their job. Not 23. 300. I understand the math." "Then what's the question?" "The question is, how do you do it? Not why." He looked at her now. "I watched Tom clean out his desk. He had a photo of his kids taped to his monitor. He peeled it off real careful, like it was the most valuable thing he owned, which it probably was. And I'm wondering, when you signed his name on that list, did you know about the photo?" Camden's jaw tightened. "No." "Did you know about his wife?" "You asked me that already." "No." "Did you want to know?" The question landed like a punch. Not because it was cruel, but because it was precise. Julian had found the exact fault line in her armor and pressed his thumb into it. "What would it change?" Camden asked. Her voice was steady, but barely. "If I'd known about his wife, about his kids, about the photo on his monitor, what would it change?" "The numbers don't care about photos, Julian. The board doesn't care about photos. The market doesn't care about any of it." "You're right," Julian said. "They don't." Then, "But you're not a number. You're not a board. You're not a market." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "You're a person, and people are supposed to care about photos." Oh, Camden stared at him. In her world, no one spoke to her like this. No one challenged her with quiet truth instead of loud opposition. Her board members shouted. Her competitors schemed. Her employees cowered. But Julian Reed sat across from her in a dark room and said what he meant without raising his voice. And it was the most disarming thing she'd ever experienced. "You don't know anything about my life," she said, and she heard the tremor in her own voice and hated it. "I know you called me tonight because you had no one else to call." The words hit the air and stayed there. Camden felt them like a physical thing, like the room had gotten smaller. "That's not," she started. "I'm not trying to hurt you, Ms. Price." "Then what are you trying to do?" Julian sat back. He ran his hand through his hair, a tired gesture, a human gesture. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I guess I'm trying to understand how someone who runs a company that employs 300 people can't find one person to call when their car breaks down." Camden opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Because I chose this," she said, and her voice cracked on the last word. Just barely. Just enough for Julian to hear. He heard it. "No one chooses to be alone, Ms. Price." "Camden." The correction was out before she could catch it. "My name is Camden." Julian nodded slowly. Camden, no one chooses to be alone. They just forget to choose the other thing. The candle between them sputtered. Wax pooled and hardened. Outside, the storm was relentless. Tell me about her, Camden said. About Sarah. Julian was quiet for a long time, so long that Camden thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he spoke, and his voice was different, lower, rougher, like he was pulling the words from somewhere deep. She was a teacher, 3rd grade. The kids loved her because she made everything into a game. Fractions were pizza slices. History was a treasure hunt. She believed every kid could learn if you just figured out the way they needed to hear it. He paused. We met at a hardware store. She was trying to buy a drill and she had no idea what she was doing. I helped her pick one out. She asked me to coffee. I said no because I thought she was out of my league. She asked again the next day, and the next day. On the 4th day, she showed up at my job site with 2 coffees and said, I'm going to keep showing up until you say yes, so you might as well save us both the trouble. Camden felt something crack open in her chest. Not pain. Something worse. Longing. We got married 9 months later. Julian continued. Everyone said it was too fast. Her parents, my parents, everybody. But Sarah said she didn't need more time to know. She said knowing was the easy part. It was the doing that was hard. She sounds like she was smart. She was the smartest person I ever met. And I don't mean book smart. I mean she understood people. She could look at someone and see what they needed before they knew it themselves. He paused. She would have liked you. Camden looked at him. You can't possibly know that. Yeah, I can. Sarah liked people who were fighting something. She said the ones who looked the toughest were always fighting the hardest. She would have taken one look at you and seen straight through every wall you've got. Camden felt the tears now. She couldn't stop them. They came silently tracking down her cheeks, and she didn't wipe them away, because wiping them would mean acknowledging them, and acknowledging them would mean this moment was real. I'm not fighting anything, she whispered. Camden. Julian's voice was gentle, so gentle it hurt. You're fighting everything. She broke. Not dramatically, not with sobs or noise. Camden Price broke the way old buildings break silently from the inside, the foundation giving way so slowly you don't notice until the whole structure shifts. She put her face in her hands and she cried. Not for Thomas Rivera or his wife's chemo. Not for the 23 people she'd fired. Not even for herself. She cried for the life she'd built, this perfect, pristine, empty monument to success that had no room in it for anyone or anything that might make her vulnerable. Julian didn't move. He didn't come to her. He didn't touch her. He didn't say, it's okay, or everything will be fine, or any of the empty phrases people use when they don't know what else to do. He just sat there, present, steady. A man who understood that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone who's falling apart is simply not look away. When Camden lifted her head, her eyes were red, and her face was raw, and Julian was still sitting in the same chair watching her with an expression she couldn't read. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be. This isn't me. I know. You keep saying I know like you actually do. Julian gave her a small, sad smile. After Sarah died, I didn't cry for 4 months. I went to work. I took care of Rosie. I fixed things. That's what I do, I fix things. And I thought if I just kept fixing things, I'd fix myself. But that's not how it works. What happened after 4 months? Rosie drew a picture at daycare, a family portrait. She drew me and her and Sarah, but Sarah was up in the corner of the page floating. And Rosie said, "That's Mommy in the sky." And I broke. Right there in the daycare parking lot. I sat in this truck and cried until I couldn't breathe. Camden looked at him. This man who fixed boilers and made soup and raised a daughter alone. This man who earned less in a year than Camden spent on clothes. This man who had more courage in his quiet, ordinary life than Camden had ever shown in all her years of power. How did you come back from that? She asked. I didn't come back. I went forward. That's different. He leaned forward again. Coming back means going to who you were before. Going forward means becoming someone new. Someone who carries the loss, but doesn't let it carry you. Camden wiped her face with the sleeve of his flannel shirt. His shirt. She was wearing his shirt and crying on his couch, and he was giving her the kind of truth that no amount of money could buy. I don't know how to go forward, she said. Yeah, you do. You just don't want to because going forward means admitting that the direction you've been heading isn't working. It's working. The company. I'm not talking about the company. Camden fell silent. The candle was almost burned down. The wax had pooled across the coffee table. Outside, the wind had shifted not quieter, but different. Like the storm was taking a breath. Julian, why did you come get me tonight? He looked at her. Because you needed help. I fired 23 people this morning. One of them coached your daughter's soccer team. I could have fired you next month for all you know. Why did you come? Julian took a long breath. Because Sarah would have come, and I try every day to be the person she believed I was. Camden felt something settle inside her. Not peace, it was too jagged for peace, but clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you stop lying to yourself long enough to hear the truth. You are, Camden said. You are that person. Julian looked at her for a long time. The candlelight caught his eyes, and they were warm and deep, and filled with something Camden hadn't seen directed at her in longer than she could remember. Not desire, not admiration, not fear. Recognition. He saw her. Not the CEO, not the corporate machine, not the woman who signed termination papers without flinching. He saw the woman underneath all of that, the one who'd been so afraid of being hurt that she'd become someone who hurt others first. You should sleep, he said finally. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Julian. Yeah. Thank you for coming to get me. He stood. He picked up the burned-down candle and set a new one in its place and lit it. The flame caught and held. Good night, Camden, he said. He walked down the hallway. She heard his door close. Soft. Careful. The way a man closes a door when he knows someone is listening. Camden lay back on the couch. She pulled the quilt up to her chin. She was wearing a dead woman's husband's shirt, sleeping on a second-hand couch in a house that cost less than her watch, and the storm was still raging, and nothing in her life made sense anymore. She closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she slept. Camden woke to the smell of pancakes. She didn't know where she was for 3 full seconds. Her body was stiff from the couch, her neck kinked at an angle that would have made her chiropractor wince, and she was wrapped in a quilt that smelled like fabric softener and something faintly sweet like cinnamon. Then it all came back. The car, the storm, Julie and Rosie, the candles, the conversation that had cracked her open like an egg. She sat up. Daylight was coming through the windows, pale and gray, and the snow was still falling, but softer now, drifting instead of attacking. The power was still out. She could tell because the digital clock on the wall was blank, and the house had the particular silence of a place running on nothing. But she could hear Julian in the kitchen, and she could hear Rosie singing. Camden folded the quilt. She didn't know why she folded it. She'd never folded a blanket in her life, and walked toward the kitchen. She stopped in the doorway. Julian was standing at the stove with a cast-iron skillet flipping pancakes over a camp stove he'd set up on the counter. Rosie was sitting on the counter next to him, her legs swinging, singing a song that seemed to be entirely made up. Something about a penguin who wanted to fly. The penguin can't fly because his wings are too small, Rosie sang. But he doesn't care because he can swim, and that's better than all. That doesn't rhyme, Julian said. It does if you sing it right. Rosie small and all rhyme, but swim and better don't. They rhyme in my song. Julian shook his head and flipped a pancake. Then he saw Camden. Morning, he said. How'd you sleep? Better than I should have. Coffee's not happening without power, but I've got orange juice. Orange juice is fine. Rosie stopped singing and looked at Camden. You're still wearing Daddy's shirt. I am. It looks funny on you. Rosie, Julian said. What it does. It's really big. Camden looked down at herself. The flannel hung past her thighs, the sleeves were rolled 3 times, and the sweatpants were bunched at her ankles. She looked absurd. She knew she looked absurd. You're right, Camden said. It looks ridiculous. Rosie grinned. But cozy, right? Camden paused. Yeah, cozy. Julian set a plate of pancakes on the table. 3 plates again. 3 sets of mismatched silverware. Rosie hopped off the counter and took her seat, and Camden sat across from her, and Julian poured orange juice into 3 glasses, 2 regular, 1 plastic with a faded cartoon character on it. Daddy, can we build a snowman after breakfast? Rosie asked, already stuffing a forkful of pancake into her mouth. We'll see how deep it is. It's really deep. I looked out my window. It's up to the porch. Then maybe a snow fort instead. A snow castle. Let's start with a fort and negotiate from there. Rosie turned to Camden. Do you want to build a snow castle with us? Camden opened her mouth, and what almost came out was, I have to get back to the city. What almost came out was, I have work. What almost came out was every excuse she'd used for 20 years to avoid being part of anything that didn't have a profit margin. I've never built a snow castle, she said instead. Rosie's eyes went wide. Never. Never. Not even when you were little. I grew up in Connecticut. We had snow, but my parents didn't. Camden stopped. She picked up her fork. We just didn't do things like that. Rosie looked at Julian. Julian looked at Camden. Something passed between the adults that Rosie was too young to understand, but old enough to feel. Well, Rosie said firmly, today you're going to learn. They ate breakfast. Camden had 3 pancakes and finished all of them, and she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten 3 of anything. Rosie talked about the snow castle she was going to build, describing turrets and a drawbridge and a moat that Julian gently explained would not function because snow didn't hold water. It will if we pack it really tight, Rosie insisted. That's not how physics works, Bug. Maybe your physics is wrong. Julian caught Camden's eye across the table and he smiled. It was a real smile, not polished, not strategic, not designed to put anyone at ease or close a deal. It was the smile of a man who was exactly where he wanted to be, doing exactly what he wanted to do. Camden looked away. She looked away because that smile made her feel something she didn't have a name for, and things without names were dangerous. After breakfast, Julian washed the dishes again. Camden didn't watch from the doorway this time. She picked up a towel and started drying. Julian glanced at her, but didn't comment. They worked side by side in silence. His hands in the water, hers on the towel. Their elbows bumped once, and neither of them acknowledged it. Your phone, Julian said. Did it charge? It's dead. Mine too. The power company's hotline was busy all night. My neighbor Mrs. Patterson has a generator. She might let us charge yours. It's fine. There's no one waiting to hear from me. Julian turned off the water. He looked at her. No one. My assistant will figure out I'm not dead when I show up at the office. What about family? My father died 6 years ago. My mother lives in Palm Beach and we talk on holidays, sometimes. Julian dried his hands. Friends. Camden set down the towel. Julian, I told you last night. I chose this. And I told you nobody chooses to be alone. Some people are better alone. No, he said. Some people are just more practiced at it. Camden felt the wall go up. The familiar hardening. The instinct to push back, to reassert control, to remind this man who she was and why his opinions about her life were irrelevant. But she didn't. Because she was standing in his kitchen, wearing his shirt, drying his dishes, and every weapon in her arsenal felt like a toy. "I need to check on the car," she said. "When the storm breaks." "The roads are closed. I listened to the battery radio this morning. They're saying another 12 hours at least." "Another 12 hours. Maybe more." Camden closed her eyes. 12 more hours in this house. 12 more hours with Julian and his quiet truths, and Rosie and her devastating innocence. 12 more hours without her armor, no office, no title, no driver, no assistant, no penthouse, no distance. "Okay," she said. "Okay," Julian said. Rosie appeared in the kitchen, wearing snow boots, a pink coat, and a hat with cat ears. "I'm ready." Julian looked at Camden. "I've got an extra pair of boots. They might be a little big. I'm not going out in the snow." "Please," Rosie said. She clasped her hands together and made a face that could have ended wars. Camden looked at this child who had no mother and a father who made pancakes on a camp stove, and a house that was small and warm and full of love. This child who had invited a stranger into her life without hesitation, without conditions, without any of the fear that governed Camden's every interaction. "Fine," Camden said, "but I'm not making a moat." "We'll see," Rosie said, and grabbed Camden's hand and pulled her toward the door. Julian's boots were 2 sizes too big. Camden stuffed the toes with newspaper. She wore Julian's spare coat, a down jacket that had seen better days, and a pair of work gloves that swallowed her hands. She looked like a woman playing dress-up in someone else's life. It felt more real than anything she'd worn in years. But they spent 2 hours in the snow. Rosie commanded the operation like a 5-star general, directing Julian to pack walls and Camden to shape turrets. Camden's turrets kept collapsing. Rosie critiqued them with brutal honesty. "That doesn't look like a turret. That looks like a lump." "I'm doing my best." "Your best needs work." Julian laughed. Camden shot him a look, but there was no heat in it. There was something else. Something warm and foreign and terrifying. Rosie threw a snowball at Julian. It hit him in the chest. He looked down at the snow on his jacket and then looked at his daughter with exaggerated shock. "Oh, you're done," he said. Rosie screamed and ran. Julian chased her around the half-built castle, moving slowly enough that she could stay ahead, but fast enough that she believed she was escaping. Camden stood there watching her hands numb in the oversized gloves, and she felt something she hadn't felt since she was a child herself. Joy. Not happiness, not satisfaction, not the cold pleasure of a closed deal or a rival outmaneuvered. Joy. The kind that has no agenda, no purpose, no endgame. The kind that just exists because people are together, and the world is white, and a 5-year-old is laughing so hard she falls face first into the snow. Julian scooped Rosie up and brushed the snow off her face. "You okay, bug?" "I won," Rosie declared, snow clinging to her eyelashes. "You absolutely did not win. I won because I'm not the one who's out of breath." Julian set her down and turned to Camden. "You've been standing there for 5 minutes doing nothing." "I've been supervising." "You've been hiding." "I don't hide." Julian bent down, packed a snowball, and held it up. Last chance to surrender. Camden Price. CEO Boardroom Predator. The woman who had fired 23 people without blinking looked at this man holding a snowball, and she felt something break loose inside her. Something ancient. Something forgotten. She bent down and packed her own snowball. Her first one ever. It was lopsided and too loose, and it crumbled when she threw it, and it hit Julian's shoulder and exploded into powder. "That's the worst throw I've ever seen," Julian said. "I've never thrown a snowball before." "How is that possible?" "I told you, my parents didn't do things like this. Julian walked toward her. He stopped 2 feet away. What did your parents do? My father worked. My mother attended events. I studied. We had dinner together on Sundays, and it lasted exactly 45 minutes because my father timed it. He timed dinner. He timed everything. He said efficiency was the foundation of success. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard. Camden laughed. It came out sharp and unexpected and real. It is, isn't it? Rosie ran over and grabbed both their hands. Come on. The castle's not finished. They went back to the castle. They built it together. Camden made 3 more turrets, and Rosie only called one of them a lump. Julian carved a doorway with his hands. Rosie attempted the moat, and it collapsed immediately just as Julian had predicted, but she declared it a success anyway. When they finally went inside, Camden's cheeks were red, and her fingers were numb, and she was wet from the waist down, and she felt more alive than she had in 20 years. Julian made hot chocolate. Real hot chocolate milk, heated on the camp stove, cocoa powder, a little sugar, a splash of vanilla. He handed Camden a mug, and their fingers touched, and this time, neither of them pulled away. Rosie drank her hot chocolate in 4 minutes and announced she was going to draw a picture of the snow castle. She disappeared into her room with a box of crayons and left Camden and Julian alone in the kitchen. They sat at the table. The hot chocolate steamed between them. Camden, Julian said. He said her name differently now, like he'd gotten used to the shape of it. Yeah. Last night you said you chose this life, the isolation, the control, all of it. I did say that. Why? Camden wrapped her hands around the mug. My father built his company from nothing. He came from a family that had nothing. And he told me over and over that the world takes everything from you if you let it. That the only way to survive is to never need anyone. To never depend on anyone. To be so strong that nothing can touch you. And you believed him. I became him. Camden looked into the mug. I became him, Julian. His voice is in my head every time I make a decision. Every time I sign a layoff. Every time I choose the company over a person. I hear him saying, "Sentiment is a liability, Camden. People are assets until they're not." He told you that. Every Sunday, at the 45-minute dinner. Julian was quiet. Then he said, "My dad was a plumber. He woke up at 5 every morning, worked until 6 at night, and came home smelling like pipe glue. And every night he sat on the floor with me and my brother, and he played with us. Didn't matter how tired he was. Didn't matter how bad the day was. He got on the floor, and he played. He sounds like a good man. He was. He is. He's retired now, lives in Florida, calls me every Thursday to ask about Rosie and tell me I should get remarried." Julian paused. "The point is, he worked just as hard as your father. He had just as little. But he made a different choice about what mattered." Camden set down the mug. "It's not that simple." "It is that simple. It's just not that easy." The words landed and Camden felt them in her bones. Simple, but not easy. The truth of her entire life in 5 words. "The board meeting is Thursday," she said. "When the storm clears, I have to go back." "I know. There are more layoffs coming. The restructuring plan I drafted, it's aggressive. 70 more positions." Julian's face didn't change, but his hands tightened around his mug. 70, he repeated. "The board wants 100. I negotiated down to 70. And that's supposed to make it better. It's supposed to save the other 230. That's how it works. You cut the branch to save the tree." "People aren't branches, Camden." "I know that. Do you?" She looked at him, and she felt the collision happening inside her. The old Camden and the new one, the CEO, and the woman in the flannel shirt, the daughter of a man who timed dinners, and the woman sitting across from a man who played on the floor with his kid every night. "I'm trying to," she said. "I'm trying to know that." Julian reached across the table. He didn't take her hand. He placed his hand next to hers, an inch apart, palm down on the scarred wood. Then try harder, he said, because 70 people are counting on it. Camden looked at his hand, then at hers. The gap between them was small. The gap between their worlds was enormous. "You know I could fire you," she said. There was no menace in it. It was almost a question. "Yeah," Julian said. "You could. Doesn't that worry you?" "No." "Why not?" "Because I've lost the most important thing I'll ever lose. After that, a job is just a job." He paused. "And because I don't think you're the person you pretend to be." Camden stared at him. "You've known me for less than 24 hours. I know. And I've seen you cry, build a snow castle, eat 3 pancakes, and fall asleep on my couch in my shirt. That's more than most people see in 20 years. Camden felt the heat behind her eyes again. She blinked it back. She was tired of crying. She was tired of feeling. She was tired of this man and his impossible honesty, and the way he made the world seem both simpler and more devastating than she'd ever imagined. "Julian, when this storm is over, I'm going to go back to my life." "I know. And things are going to be different. I'm going to be in a boardroom, and you're going to be fixing heating panels, and we're not going to sit at a kitchen table and drink hot chocolate." "Probably not." "So what is this? What are we doing right now?" Julian looked at her. Really looked at her. And for a long moment he didn't say anything. The house was quiet. The snow was falling. Rosie was drawing in her room. The world had shrunk to this kitchen, this table, this impossible space between two people who had no business being in the same room. "Right now," Julian said slowly, "we're just two people being honest with each other. That's enough." Camden's hand moved. Just slightly. Just enough to close the gap. Her fingertips touched his. Julian didn't pull away. They sat like that, barely touching, while the storm kept its grip on the world outside, and something new and fragile and terrifying took root between them in the silence. Then Rosie came running down the hallway, waving a piece of paper. Look at my picture." She slammed it on the table between them. It was a crayon drawing. A snow castle, lopsided, enormous, magnificent. And in front of it, 3 stick figures. A tall one with brown hair, a small one with curls, and a third one, slightly taller with yellow hair and a blue shirt that was way too big for her. 3 people, standing together, in the snow. Camden looked at the drawing. She looked at Rosie's proud, beaming face. She looked at Julian, whose eyes were fixed on the picture with an expression she finally had a name for: hope. And Camden Price, who had built an empire on the principle that needing people was weakness, felt her throat close around a truth she could no longer deny. She didn't want to leave this house. She didn't want to go back to her penthouse. She didn't want to sit in a boardroom and sign away 70 lives while pretending the numbers were the only thing that mattered. She wanted to stay right here at this scarred kitchen table with pancake crumbs and crayon drawings and hot chocolate, and a man who saw through her, and a child who drew her into the family portrait without asking permission. But the storm would end. It always did. And when it did, Camden Price would have to decide who she was going to be. She picked up the drawing and held it carefully, like it was the most valuable thing she'd ever touched. "It's beautiful, Rosie," she said. And she meant it more than she'd ever meant anything in her life. The storm broke at 4:47 p.m. on Wednesday. Camden knew the exact time because the power came back on, and every clock in Julian's house blinked to life at once, and the refrigerator kicked in with a groan, and the hallway nightlight flickered on, and suddenly, the house that had felt like a world unto itself became just a house again, small, ordinary, connected to everything outside. Rosie cheered. Julian checked the faucets, checked the pipes, checked the thermostat. Camden stood in the living room holding her dead phone and feeling something she didn't expect. Dread. "Roads should be open by morning," Julian said, coming back from the basement. "The plows have already started. I can hear them on the main road." "Good," Camden said. The word felt hollow. "I can drive you to your car first thing. We'll see if it starts. If not, I can tow it to Mike's garage. He's about a mile from where you broke down. That's not necessary. I'll call a service. Camden. She looked at him. Let me help you. It was such a small thing. 4 words. But they landed on Camden like a weight, because she understood now that Julian didn't offer help the way other people did, as a transaction, as a favor to be repaid, as leverage to be stored. He offered it the way he offered soup and hot chocolate and his own shirt off his back. Because it was the right thing to do. Because someone needed it. Okay, she said. The power brought her phone back to life. She plugged it into Julian's charger and watched the screen fill with notifications. 17 missed calls from Priya. 11 from Gerald. 6 from Diana in HR. 43 emails. A text from her mother that said, "Saw the storm on the news. Hope you're somewhere warm. Call when you can." No period at the end. No, I love you. Just efficient, detached concern. Her father's daughter, even in widowhood. Camden started reading the emails. Each one pulled her further from this kitchen and closer to the world she'd built, the world of quarterly projections and restructuring plans, and 70 names on a list. Gerald's email was the longest. Board moved the meeting to Thursday at 2 p.m. They want the full restructuring proposal. Whitfield Group is pushing for deeper cuts. They're talking about 120 now, not 70. Call me. Camden read it twice. 120. That wasn't restructuring. That was gutting. Bad news, Julian asked. He was sitting across from her at the kitchen table, the same table where they'd eaten pancakes, where their fingers had touched, where Rosie had slammed down a crayon drawing of 3 people in front of a snow castle. The board moved up the meeting, and the numbers got worse. Worse how? They want more cuts, 120 positions instead of 70. Julian was quiet for a moment. 120 families. I know what it means, Julian. I know you know. I'm just making sure you hear it. Camden set down her phone. She looked at him across the table, and she felt the 2 versions of herself pulling in opposite directions. The woman who had sat in this kitchen for 2 days learning how to be human again, and the CEO who had a boardroom to walk into in less than 24 hours. What am I supposed to do? She asked. It wasn't rhetorical. She was genuinely asking, and that terrified her. What do you want to do? I want to tell them no. I want to walk in there and say we're not cutting 120 people. I want to find another way. Then do that. It's not that simple. You keep saying that, because it keeps being true. Camden pressed her palms against the table. If I push back, the board will replace me. If they replace me, whoever comes next will cut 200, 300. They'll strip the company to the frame and sell it for parts. I've seen it happen. So you cut 120 to save the rest. That's the math. And what about the 120? They get severance. They get references. They get fired, Camden. The rest is just wrapping paper. She flinched. Not because he was wrong, but because he said it the same way he said everything, without cruelty, without agenda, just the clean, sharp edge of truth. I didn't build this system, she said. I just work inside it. You're the CEO. If you don't change it, who does? That's not how corporate governance works. I don't care how corporate governance works. I care about Tom Rivera, whose wife is doing chemo, whose kids need their father employed. I care about Linda Chen in my department, who's 61 years old and has been with the company since before you graduated college. I care about Marcus Webb, who just had twins and is already working double shifts to cover daycare. You know all these people. You know all these. I fix their heating. I unclog their toilets. I replace their ceiling tiles. You learn a lot about people when you're working in their space. Julian leaned forward. They talk to me, Camden. They talk to me because I'm invisible to people like you. And they're scared. They've been scared since the first round of layoffs. They come to work every day wondering if today is the day they get called into an office and handed a box. Camden's chest tightened. She thought about Thomas Rivera peeling the photo off his monitor. She thought about the way he'd looked at her, not with anger, but with devastation. The look of a man who'd just been told he didn't matter. "I hear you," she said quietly. "Do you? Because hearing and acting are two different things. What would you have me do?" Julian walk into the boardroom and tell 8 of the most powerful investors in the country that we're going to prioritize feelings over financials. I'd have you walk in and tell them the truth. The truth. That cutting people doesn't save companies. That the people who work for you aren't line items. That there's a better way. What better way? Julian sat back. "I don't know, that's your job. I fix boilers. But I know that every time I've taken a shortcut on a repair, every time I've patched something instead of fixing it right, it comes back worse. Every single time. You patch a pipe, it bursts next winter. You patch a company by cutting people, and a year from now, you're cutting again." Camden stared at him. The analogy was simple, almost embarrassingly simple, and it was exactly right. "I need to go," she said. "Tonight. I need to get back and prepare." "The roads." "I don't care about the roads. I'll find a way." Julian studied her. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet, but I can't figure it out sitting here." Something crossed Julian's face, quick, almost hidden, but Camden saw it, a flash of hurt, quickly buried. "I didn't mean," she started. "I know what you meant." He stood up. "I'll see if Mrs. Patterson's car can get through. Her husband has a Jeep." "Julian, that's not what I—" "It's fine, Camden. You've got a company to save. I understand." He walked toward the hallway, and his voice was even controlled, but Camden could hear what was underneath the sound of a man pulling back, protecting himself. The same thing she'd done 1,000 times. "Wait," she said. He stopped but didn't turn around. "I'm not running away from this," she said. "From what happened here, I'm not. You don't owe me an explanation. I know I don't owe you one. I'm giving you one." She stood and walked toward him. She stopped 3 feet away. "2 days ago, I was a woman who couldn't call a single person for help. Tonight I'm standing in your kitchen, wearing your shirt, trying to figure out how to save 120 jobs, because a man who fixes boilers told me that shortcuts come back worse. Something happened here, Julian. I'm not pretending it didn't." He turned around. His face was unreadable, but his eyes weren't. His eyes were the same eyes she'd seen in the candlelight, deep, warm, carrying something heavy. "What happened here?" he asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "But it matters. You matter." Julian looked at her for a long time. The house was quiet. Rosie had fallen asleep on the living room floor with her crayons scattered around her, the drawing of the snow castle clutched in one hand. "You matter too," Julian said. "I just hope you know that. Not the company, not the title, you." Camden felt the words settle into a place inside her that had been empty so long she'd forgotten it was there. She swallowed hard. "I need to go," she whispered. "I know." She went to the bathroom and changed back into her own clothes. They were dry now, hanging on the towel rack where Julian had placed them. She put on her slacks, her blouse, her jacket. She picked up her heels and held them staring at Julian's flannel shirt hanging on the back of the door. She should leave it. It was his. She folded it and put it in her bag. When she came out, Julian was on the phone in the kitchen. He hung up and turned to her. "Mrs. Patterson's husband can drive you to the train station in Greenfield. The Metro North is running. You can be in the city by 10. "Thank you." "Rosie's asleep. I'm going to carry her to bed." He paused. "Do you want to say goodbye?" Camden looked toward the living room where Rosie was curled on the floor, her cheeks still pink from the snow, her breath slow and even. "If I wake her up, she'll want me to stay," Camden said. "Probably. And I can't stay." "I know." Camden walked to the living room. She knelt beside Rosie. She reached out and gently brushed a curl from the girl's forehead. Rosie stirred. Her eyes fluttered, but didn't open. "Good night, Rosie," Camden whispered. Rosie murmured something. It might have been, "Good night." It might have been, "Stay." Camden chose not to know which. She stood and turned to Julian. He was standing in the hallway, leaning against the wall, watching her with an expression that was equal parts sadness and something else. Something that looked like the beginning of something, the first page of a story neither of them had agreed to write. "Julian." "Yeah." "The flannel shirt. I took it. I'm sorry." He almost smiled. "Keep it." "I'll return it." "I don't want it back." And they stood there, 5 feet apart, worlds apart. And Camden felt the gravity of the moment, the pull to stay, the push to go, the knowledge that whatever she did next would define her in ways that no board meeting ever could. A horn honked outside. Mr. Patterson's Jeep. "That's my ride," Camden said. Julian walked her to the door. He opened it, and the cold rushed in sharp and clean. The snow had stopped. The world was white and still and new. Camden stepped onto the porch. She turned back. "Julian, Go save your company, Camden." "That's not what I was going to say." "I know." He held her gaze. "But it's what you need to hear." She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him that what she needed to hear was something else entirely. Something about this house, and this man, and this child, and the way the last 48 hours had reached inside her and rearranged everything. But the Jeep was idling, and the train was running, and 120 people were waiting for her to decide their futures. "Goodbye, Julian." "Goodbye, Camden." Again she walked down the porch steps. Her heels sank into the snow. She didn't look back. If she looked back, she'd stop walking. And if she stopped walking, she'd never leave. And if she never left, 120 people would lose their jobs while she sat in a warm kitchen drinking hot chocolate with a man she barely knew, but somehow understood completely. She climbed into the Jeep. Mr. Patterson, a large, quiet man with a gray beard, put it in gear and pulled onto the road. As they drove away, Camden looked in the side mirror. Julian was standing on the porch. He didn't wave. He didn't move. He just stood there watching her leave. And the snow was bright around him, and the house was small behind him, and Camden pressed her hand against the bag in her lap, the bag that held a dead woman's husband's flannel shirt, and she felt the full, devastating weight of what she was doing. She was choosing the world over the man, the job over the feeling, the machine over the human. It was the same choice she'd always made, but this time, for the first time, it felt wrong, and the train was warm and mostly empty. Camden found a seat by the window and watched the countryside slide past all white fields and bare trees and small houses with lights in the windows. She opened her laptop and stared at the restructuring proposal. The spreadsheet. The names. 120 names. She scrolled through them. She didn't know most of them. They were just names, just rows. Torn, but Julian's voice was in her head. 120 families. Linda Chen, 61 years old. Marcus Webb just had twins. Tom Rivera, whose wife is doing chemo. She thought about Rosie's drawing. 3 stick figures, a snow castle, a family that didn't exist. She thought about Julian saying, "Every time I've patched something instead of fixing it right, it comes back worse." She closed the spreadsheet. She opened a blank document. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then she began to type. Not the restructuring plan, not the cuts. Something else, something new. A proposal she hadn't considered before, because considering it would have required her to think about her employees as people. People with photos on their monitors, and kids in daycare, and wives in chemo, and lives that extended far beyond the walls of her company. She typed for 2 hours. The train rocked, and the world darkened outside, and Camden Price wrote the most important document of her career. Not because it was brilliant, it was rough, unfinished, full of gaps she'd need to fill. But because for the first time, it started with the right question. Not, how many do we cut? But, how do we keep them? She arrived at Grand Central at 10:23 p.m. She took a cab to her penthouse. She walked through the door, and the marble floors echoed under her heels, and the floor-to-ceiling windows showed her the city glittering vast, indifferent, and the apartment that had always felt like an achievement now felt like a crypt. 4,000 square feet, Italian marble, a kitchen she never used, a dining table for 12 where she'd never hosted a single dinner. She set her bag on the counter. She pulled out Julian's flannel shirt. She held it to her face and breathed in laundry detergent and something warm and specific fading now, but still there. She hung it in her closet. Between a Chanel blazer and a Burberry coat, Julian Reed's flannel shirt hung like a question she wasn't ready to answer. Camden sat on her bed. Her bed that cost $12,000. Her bed that was perfectly made by a housekeeper she'd never met. Her bed that was empty every night of her life. She picked up her phone and scrolled to Julian's number. She typed a message. "I made it home. Thank you for everything." She stared at it, then deleted it. Too formal. "I'm home. Thank you." Deleted. Too short. Julian. "I took your shirt, and I don't think I'm going to give it back. I think I'm going to keep it, because it's the only thing in my apartment that feels real. I think something happened in your house that I don't understand yet. I think your daughter is the bravest person I've ever met. I think you're the most honest man I've ever known. I think I'm terrified." She deleted all of it. She put the phone down. She didn't send anything. Instead, she opened her laptop and went back to the proposal. The proposal that started with, "How do we keep them?" The proposal that was born in a kitchen that smelled like pancakes. The proposal that might save 120 jobs, or might get her fired, or both. She worked until 3 a.m. Then she closed the laptop, lay back on her $12,000 bed, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow was Thursday. The board meeting was at 2 p.m. She had 11 hours to build a case that went against everything her father had taught her. Everything the board expected. Everything the market demanded. 11 hours to become someone new. She closed her eyes. She didn't sleep. But she kept them closed, and in the darkness behind her eyelids, she saw a small kitchen, a scarred table, a man washing dishes, and a little girl who drew strangers into family portraits without asking permission. And Camden Price held onto that image like a lifeline, because tomorrow she was going to walk into a room full of sharks and tell them that people were more important than profits, and she needed something real to hold on to when they tried to tear her apart. Camden walked into the building at 7 a.m., wearing a charcoal suit, black heels, and Julian Reed's flannel shirt folded inside her briefcase. She didn't know why she brought it. She didn't examine the impulse. She just packed it the way a soldier packs a photograph, something to hold when the bullets start flying. Priya was already at her desk. She stood up the moment Camden stepped off the elevator, and her face cycled through relief, confusion, and professional composure in about 2 seconds. "Ms. Price, I've been trying to reach you for—" "I know. My phone was dead. What's the status?" "Katie. Gerald has called 4 times this morning. The Whitfield Group sent a revised proposal at midnight. They're pushing for 130 cuts now, not 120. Diana needs your signature on the severance templates. And there's a reporter from the Wall Street Journal who—" "Cancel the reporter. Tell Diana I'll get to the templates when I'm ready. And tell Gerald I'll see him at the meeting." "He wants to meet before the meeting." "Then he can want." Dane. Priya blinked. In 3 years of working for Camden, she'd never heard her refuse a pre-meeting with the CFO. "Yes, ma'am." Camden walked into her office and closed the door. She sat behind her desk, the desk that cost more than Julian's truck, more than Julian's house, possibly more than everything Julian owned combined, and she opened her laptop and stared at the proposal she'd written on the train. It was rough. It was incomplete. It had holes big enough to drive a truck through, and the board would find every one of them. But it was right. She felt it in her gut, and Camden Price had built a career trusting her gut even when the numbers disagreed. She spent the next 4 hours revising. She pulled data she'd never pulled before, Employee retention costs, retraining ROI, the actual dollar value of institutional knowledge lost when you fire someone who's been with the company for 15 years. She ran projections. She built scenarios. She did the math the way her father had taught her, cold, precise, irrefutable, but she started from a different premise. Not what can we cut, but what happens if we don't. At 11:30, Gerald knocked on her door. He didn't wait for permission. He walked in and sat down across from her, and his face was the color of old paper. "Camden, we need to talk." "We'll talk at the meeting, Gerald. This can't wait. Whitfield called me directly this morning. They want 130. They're threatening to pull their investment if we don't deliver." "Let them threaten." Gerald stared at her. "Let them." "Camden, they hold 22% of our shares. If they pull out..." "I know what happens if they pull out." "Then you know we can't afford to play games." Camden closed her laptop. She looked at Gerald, this man she'd worked with for 6 years, who balanced the books while she built the empire, who had never once challenged a decision she made because challenging Camden Price was a career-ending move. "Gerald, how many people work for this company?" 312, as of last count. "Do you know their names?" "Their names?" "Any of them." "Do you know any of their names?" Gerald shifted in his chair. "I know the department heads. I know the senior. I mean the people on the floor, the ones who actually keep this company running. The maintenance workers, the junior analysts, the mailroom. Do you know any of their names?" "Camden, I don't see how that's..." "Julian Reed. He works in facilities. He's been with us 2 years. He's a single father. His wife died of cancer 3 years ago. He drives a Ford F-150 that's older than some of our employees. He makes tomato soup from scratch because he thinks store-bought has too many preservatives. And 2 nights ago, he drove 15 minutes through a blizzard to rescue me when my car broke down, and he didn't ask for anything in return. Not a bonus, not a favor, not even a thank you." Gerald said nothing. "Tom Rivera, operations, 11 years. You signed his termination letter. Did you know his wife started chemo in September?" "I didn't." "Linda Chen, facilities, 61 years old. Been here since before either of us. Marcus Webb, twins, working double shifts to cover daycare." Camden leaned forward. "These are the people Whitfield wants us to cut. Not numbers, Gerald. People. And I'm done pretending there's no difference." Gerald loosened his tie. "Camden, I understand the sentiment, but sentiment doesn't..." "Don't." The word came out sharp enough to cut. "Don't tell me sentiment is a liability. I've heard that speech. I grew up with that speech. And I'm telling you right now, it's wrong. The board won't..." "The board will hear what I have to say, and then they'll decide. That's how this works." Gerald stood up. He looked at her the way people look at someone who's either having a breakdown or a breakthrough, and he couldn't tell which. "I hope you know what you're doing," he said. "So do I." He left. Camden sat alone in her office. She opened her briefcase and touched the flannel shirt. The fabric was soft under her fingers. She left her hand there for 10 seconds. Then she closed the briefcase and went back to work. At 1:45 p.m., Camden walked to the boardroom. She carried her laptop, a printed copy of her proposal, and the knowledge that the next hour would either save her career or end it. The hallway was long and quiet, and her heels clicked against the marble. And she thought about Julian's kitchen, where the floor was linoleum, and the table was scarred, and the only sound was a child singing about a penguin who couldn't fly. She pushed open the boardroom door. 8 people were already seated. The Whitfield Group had sent 3 representatives. Richard Whitfield himself, his son David, and their chief analyst, a woman named Margaret Holt, who was known for dismantling CEOs, the way surgeons dismantled tumors. Gerald was there. Diana, from HR. 3 other board members, veterans of the corporate world, who had seen 100 restructurings and treated each one like a chess move. Camden sat at the head of the table. She placed her laptop in front of her. She did not open it. "Thank you all for being here," she said. "I know this meeting was moved up, and I appreciate your flexibility." Richard Whitfield leaned back in his chair. He was 70 years old, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, and he looked at Camden the way a hawk looks at a field mouse. "Let's get to it, Camden. We've seen the numbers. We've sent our revised proposal. 130 positions, clean fast and done by end of quarter." "I've read your proposal," Camden said. "I'm not implementing it." The room went still. David Whitfield, younger, hungrier, less polished than his father, leaned forward. "Excuse me. I said I'm not implementing it. I have an alternative." Margaret Holt clicked her pen. "We'd love to hear it." Camden opened her laptop and projected her proposal onto the screen. She walked them through it, every number, every projection, every scenario. She showed them the cost of turnover. She showed them the data on retraining versus replacing. She showed them what happened to companies that slashed their workforce by 40%, the productivity collapse, the morale freefall, the talent exodus that followed like an aftershock. She presented a phased approach: voluntary early retirement for employees over 60 with full benefits, a hiring freeze, not a layoff, salary reductions at the executive level starting with her own, cross-training programs that would allow employees to fill multiple roles, revenue diversification strategies that would reduce dependence on the sectors that were bleeding. It was not a soft plan. It was not a sentimental plan. It was ruthlessly practical, and it was backed by numbers that were as cold and precise as anything her father could have produced. But it started from a different place. It started from the premise that the people who worked for this company were the company, not the buildings, not the stock price, not the brand, the people. When she finished, the room was silent. "Wow." Richard Whitfield spoke first. "This is creative, Camden. I'll give you that. But it's slow. The market wants action now. Investors want certainty." "Investors want returns," Camden replied. "And I'm showing you a path to returns that doesn't require gutting the organization." "The salary reductions," Margaret Holt said. "You're proposing a 15% cut at the C-suite level. That includes yourself. 20% for me." Gerald's head snapped toward her. She hadn't told him that part. "And the voluntary retirement?" David Whitfield asked. "What if not enough people take it?" "I've already identified 47 employees who are eligible and likely to accept. That gets us halfway to the headcount reduction you're looking for without a single involuntary termination." "Halfway isn't all the way," Richard said. "The cross-training program covers the rest. We redistribute the workload, eliminate redundancies organically, and come out the other side with a leaner, more versatile workforce that's loyal because we didn't throw them away." "Loyal," David repeated like the word tasted strange. "Yes, loyal. It's a concept that seems to have fallen out of fashion in this room, but it has a dollar value, and it's higher than you think." Richard Whitfield looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at Margaret. Margaret looked at her notes. "The numbers work," Margaret said quietly. "Barely. But they work. The risk is timing. If the market shifts before the phased approach shows results." "Then I take the fall," Camden said. "Not the employees. Me. If this doesn't deliver within 18 months, I'll resign. No severance, no parachute. I'll walk out, and you can bring in whoever you want." The room went dead silent. Gerald looked like he was going to pass out. Diana was writing furiously. David Whitfield's mouth was open. Richard Whitfield's expression hadn't changed, but something shifted behind his eyes, something that might have been surprise, or might have been respect. "You're betting your career on this," Richard said. "I'm betting my career on the people who built this company. If that's a bad bet, then I've been the wrong CEO all along." Shout. The words hung in the air. Camden felt them vibrating in her chest. She thought about Julian standing in his kitchen saying, "People aren't branches, Camden." She thought about Rosie drawing 3 stick figures in front of a snow castle. She thought about her father timing dinner about efficiency as the foundation of success, about a life built on the principle that needing people was weakness. She was done with that principle. She was done with that life. Richard Whitfield looked around the table. "I'd like a moment to confer with my team." "Take all the time you need," Camden said. She stood and walked out of the boardroom. She went to the restroom, locked herself in a stall, and put her hands on her knees and breathed. Her heart was hammering. Her hands were shaking. She had just put her career, her entire identity on the table, and pushed all her chips to the center. She pulled out her phone. She stared at Julian's number. This time she typed a message and sent it before she could delete it. "I did something today that I think you'd be proud of. I don't know if it's going to work, but I did it because a man who fixes boilers told me that shortcuts come back worse." "Thank you, Julian." She put the phone away. She washed her hands. She looked at herself in the mirror, the charcoal suit, the black heels, the perfectly composed face of a CEO who had just bet everything on a flannel shirt and a bowl of tomato soup. She walked back to the boardroom. Richard Whitfield was standing. That was either very good or very bad. "Camden," he said, "we've discussed your proposal." She sat down. She folded her hands on the table. She waited. "It's unconventional, it's risky, and frankly, it's not the kind of plan I expected from you. I'm not the kind of CEO you expected anymore." Richard nodded slowly. "Margaret's run the preliminary numbers. Your projections hold with caveats. We want quarterly reviews, hard benchmarks, and if you miss 2 consecutive quarters, the conversation changes." "Agreed." "Then we'll support the proposal, conditionally." Camden exhaled. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She felt something move through her relief, but also something heavier. Something that felt like responsibility. Real responsibility. Not the kind that came with a title, but the kind that came with knowing 312 names and what they stood for. "Thank you," she said. The meeting ended. People stood, gathered papers, murmured to each other. Gerald caught her arm on the way out. 20%, he whispered. "You cut your own salary 20%, and you didn't tell me. Would you have tried to talk me out of it?" "Absolutely." "That's why I didn't tell you." Gerald shook his head. He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "Who are you right now?" Camden almost laughed. "I'm working on that." She went back to her office. She closed the door. She sat behind her desk, and her phone buzzed. A text from Julian. "Rosie wants to know if you'll come back for hot chocolate sometime. I told her you're a busy and important person." She said busy and important people need hot chocolate the most. Camden read it 3 times. Then she typed back. "Tell Rosie she's the smartest person I know, and tell her yes. I'll come back." She put the phone down. She looked at her office, the mahogany desk, the leather chair, the view of the city from the 40th floor. All of it hers, all of it earned, and all of it she realized completely meaningless without someone to share it with. She opened her briefcase and took out Julian's flannel shirt. She unfolded it and draped it over the back of her chair. It looked absurd, this faded, soft, worn-out shirt draped across a $5,000 chair in a corner office that overlooked Manhattan. It looked absurd. It looked like the beginning of something. Her phone buzzed one more time. Julian again. "Rosie says Saturday. She says bring marshmallows. Big ones, not small ones." She was very specific about this. Camden smiled. Not the polished smile she wore in boardrooms. Not the strategic smile she used to close deals. A real smile. The kind that starts in the chest and works its way up and takes over the whole face before you can stop it. She typed back 3 words. Tell her deal. Then Camden Price, CEO, boardroom survivor. The woman who had fired 23 people on a Tuesday and woke up wearing a stranger's shirt. On a Wednesday, leaned back in her chair and looked out at the city she'd conquered, and she felt something she hadn't felt in so long. She'd forgotten what it was called. She felt ready. Not for the quarterly reviews, not for the benchmarks, not for the fight she'd have with the board every 90 days for the next 18 months. Ready for Saturday. Ready for hot chocolate and big marshmallows, and a 5-year-old general, and a man who fixed things, and a small warm house where the floor was linoleum, and the table was scarred, and the door was always open. Ready for a life that wasn't perfect. Ready for a life that was real. Camden picked up the flannel shirt from the back of her chair. She held it against her chest and closed her eyes, and in the silence of her corner office, 40 floors above the city, she let herself feel the full weight of everything she'd almost lost and everything she was about to gain. Then she opened her eyes, folded the shirt, neatly tucked it back into her briefcase, and got back to work. Because Camden Price didn't just change her mind, she changed her life. And a life worth changing was a life worth fighting for. 1 scarred kitchen table. 1 bowl of soup. 1 crayon. Drawing. 1 snowball. 1 flannel shirt at a time.